For 4 agonizing years, the Western Front of World War I remained locked in a seemingly unbreakable stalemate, a vast, scarred expanse stretching from the Swiss border in the south all the way to the storm-lashed shores of the North Sea. This front was not a single line, but a labyrinthine network of trenches, dugouts, and barbed wire, snaking across the landscape and carving the earth into a patchwork of mud, misery, and death. The ground between the opposing lines, known as No Man's Land, was a nightmarish wasteland, pockmarked by shell craters, littered with the splintered remains of trees and strewn with the twisted detritus of war. Shattered helmets, broken rifles, and the silent forms of those who had fallen. The thunderous rattle of machine guns and the ceaseless, bone-shaking roar of artillery defined daily life on the front. Any attempt to cross no man's land was almost certain death. Machine guns swept the open ground with withering fire, while artillery shells rained down, churning the earth into a morass of mud and blood. Major offensives, such as those at the Somme and Passchendaele, became infamous for their scale and futility. Thousands of men surged forward, only to be cut down in waves. The ground gained measured in yards, the cost in lives almost unimaginable. The landscape itself was transformed. Once fertile fields became seas of mud, where bodies and equipment vanished beneath the surface, never to be recovered. The commanders of the era, many of whom had been trained in the tactics of previous wars, found themselves ill-equipped for the brutal realities of industrialized conflict. Bound by tradition and hampered by the limitations of contemporary technology, they often resorted to outdated strategies, ordering massed infantry assaults in the hope of overwhelming the enemy by sheer numbers. These attacks, known as going over the top, sent waves of soldiers scrambling out of their trenches, only to be met by a wall of bullets, shrapnel, and poison gas. The result was a tragic cycle of attack and counterattack, with little to show for the enormous sacrifice. Life in the trenches was a relentless ordeal, a daily struggle against the elements as much as the enemy. The ground was perpetually sodden, rain and shell fire turning the narrow passageways into rivers of mud that sucked at boots and swallowed equipment. Dugouts meant to provide shelter often flooded or collapsed, leaving men exposed to the cold and damp. The air was thick with the stench of rotting corpses, stagnant water, and the acrid tang of chemical weapons. Rats, some as large as cats, thrived in the darkness, feeding on the dead and spreading disease. Lice infested uniforms and bedding, causing incessant itching and spreading trench fever, a debilitating illness that sapped the strength of even the hardiest soldiers. The psychological toll of trench warfare was profound and enduring. Soldiers lived under the constant threat of sudden death. An artillery shell could land without warning. A sniper's bullet could find its mark in an instant. The relentless noise of bombardment, the screams of the wounded, and the ever-present fear of gas attacks wore down even the most resilient minds. Many suffered from what was then called shell shock, now recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, manifesting in tremors, nightmares, and emotional numbness. The landscape itself became a symbol of despair. Endless rows of graves, shattered trees, and ruined villages, all bearing silent witness to the war's terrible cost. The technological limitations of the time only deepened the deadlock. Communications were primitive and unreliable. Telephone wires, strung along the trenches, were easily severed by shell fire, forcing runners to brave no man's land with vital messages. Tanks, a new and untested invention, often broke down or became hopelessly bogged in the mud, while early aircraft were fragile and limited in their ability to influence the battle. Even the introduction of new weapons, such as poison gas, failed to deliver a decisive breakthrough. Gas masks and shifting winds often rendered these attacks as dangerous to the attackers as to the enemy. Strategically, both sides found themselves trapped in a deadly equilibrium. Every advance was met by layer upon layer of defences. Deep trenches, reinforced concrete bunkers, and belts of barbed wire that could stop even the most determined assault. The front line shifted only marginally, despite countless offensives and counterattacks, each one exacting a terrible price in lives and material. The war became a contest of attrition, with victory measured not in territory gained, but in the ability to endure and outlast the enemy. By 1918, the relentless grind of war had drained the resources of all the combatant nations to the breaking point. Supplies of food, ammunition and medical equipment were scarce, and the land itself seemed exhausted. Fields once rich with crops now barren and cratered, villages reduced to rubble, and forests stripped bare for firewood and fortifications. Soldiers and civilians alike faced hunger, deprivation, and the ever-present shadow of loss. The fate of the conflict hung precariously in the balance. The world watched and waited, desperate for an end to the carnage. It was clear that only a bold new approach, one that could overcome the technological, tactical, and strategic barriers of trench warfare, would have the power to break the deadlock and decide the outcome of the Great War. The stage was set for innovation, for a battle that would change the course of history and finally shatter the stalemate that had gripped Europe for so long. The year 1918 stands as one of the most pivotal in the history of the First World War, a year when the very fate of Europe seemed to hang in the balance. The conflict, which had raged for nearly 4 years, was suddenly transformed by a series of seismic events. Chief among these was the collapse of Russia's Eastern Front, a direct consequence of the Bolshevik Revolution that swept through the Russian Empire in late 1917. The new Bolshevik government, desperate to consolidate power and end the suffering at home, negotiated the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany. With a stroke of the pen, Russia withdrew from the war, and the vast frozen expanse of the Eastern Front, once a battleground stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea, fell eerily silent. For Germany, this was a moment of both relief and opportunity. No longer forced to fight a two-front war, the German High Command could now shift its focus entirely to the west. Nearly 1 million battle-hardened soldiers, along with mountains of artillery, machine guns and supplies, were loaded onto trains and sent racing toward France and Belgium. The logistical feat was staggering. Endless lines of freight cars snaked through railway yards, carrying the hopes of a nation desperate for victory. The balance of manpower and resources on the Western Front shifted dramatically, giving Germany a fleeting but significant advantage. Yet even as Germany prepared for a decisive blow, a new force was gathering strength across the Atlantic. The United States, having entered the war in April 1917, was now mobilizing on a scale never before seen. American factories roared to life, churning out rifles, artillery shells, trucks and uniforms. Convoys of Liberty ships braved the perilous U-boat-infested waters of the Atlantic, delivering millions of tons of food, ammunition and equipment to the embattled Allies. By 1918, fresh American troops, young, eager and well-equipped, were arriving in France by the thousands each day. The logistical operation was unprecedented, reshaping the very nature of the war and infusing the weary Allied armies with new hope and energy. The battlefield itself was undergoing a revolution. The static trench warfare that had defined the Western Front was giving way to new tactics and technologies. Engineers and inventors on both sides raced to develop more effective weapons. Machine guns with higher rates of fire, tanks capable of crossing barbed wire and trenches, and aircraft that could bomb, strafe, and scout enemy positions. Chemical warfare, once a terrifying novelty, became a grim reality. Deadly clouds of gas forced soldiers to don cumbersome masks and adapt their tactics. The Allies and Central Powers alike poured resources into innovation, seeking any edge that might break the deadlock and deliver victory. In the shadowy rooms of German headquarters, war planners pored over maps and intercepted messages, searching for a way to exploit their temporary advantage. They knew time was short. Every day brought more American soldiers and supplies to the front. The answer was a bold, high-risk strategy, the Kaiserschlacht, or spring offensive. Launched in March 1918, this massive assault aimed to break through Allied lines before the full weight of American power could be brought to bear. The plan relied on speed, surprise, and the latest stormtrooper infiltration tactics, small, highly trained units that would slip through weak points, bypass strongholds, and sow chaos in the enemy's rear. At first, the offensive achieved stunning results. German troops surged forward, capturing ground that had been bitterly contested for years, but the rapid advance came at a terrible cost. Supply lines stretched to the breaking point struggled to keep up with the pace of the attack. Ammunition and food ran dangerously low, and the exhausted soldiers faced mounting casualties. The initial momentum slowed, then stalled, as the logistical realities of modern warfare caught up with the attackers. The offensive, so promising at first, ground to a halt amid the mud and ruins of northern France. The Allies, battered but unbroken, responded with determination and ingenuity. Defensive lines were reinforced with barbed wire and machine gun nests, while artillery units perfected the use of creeping barrages to shield infantry from attack. Flexible reserves were held back, ready to counterattack at critical moments. Nowhere was this resilience more evident than at Villers-Bretonneux, where the line bent under the weight of the German assault, but did not break. The stage was set for a new phase of the war, one in which the Allies would seize the initiative. Recognizing the need for unity and swift decision-making, the Allies took a historic step. For the first time, their armies were placed under a single unified command, led by the French General Marshal Ferdinand Foch. This new structure allowed for faster, more coordinated responses to German attacks and enabled the Allies to plan complex operations that spanned multiple national armies. Strategic thinking shifted from mere survival to the possibility of counterattack, with planners searching for weaknesses in the overstretched German lines. British commander Sir Douglas Haig, now operating within this unified command, ordered a series of probing attacks along the front. These were not full-scale offensives, but carefully planned operations designed to test German defences, gather vital intelligence, and keep the enemy off balance. Each attack provided valuable lessons, helping the Allies refine their tactics and identify the best places to strike when the time was right. Among these operations, one stood out for its ambition and meticulous planning. The task was assigned to the Australian Corps, commanded by the brilliant and innovative Lieutenant General John Monash. Monash was determined to break the cycle of costly, indecisive attacks. He insisted on careful preparation, precise timing, and the integration of the latest technology, tanks, aircraft, and coordinated artillery, to achieve overwhelming force at the decisive point. The objective was the strategically vital village of Le Hamel, held by German forces and bristling with defences. Its capture would not only strengthen the Allied line, but also serve as a proving ground for the new methods of modern warfare. In the days to come, the fields around Le Hamel would witness a battle unlike any that had come before, a battle that would help shape the future of war itself. Le Hamel, though just a small and battered village on the Western Front, stood at the heart of a much larger struggle. Its shattered buildings and cratered streets bore silent witness to the relentless fighting that had swept across northern France. Yet beneath its ruined exterior, Le Hamel held a significance far greater than its size might suggest. The village's location was of immense strategic value. Nestled on a slight rise, Le Hamel overlooked the surrounding countryside, providing whoever held it with a commanding view of the battlefield. Its capture was not just a matter of local importance, it was a key to the broader campaign in the region. The Germans had established a salient at Le Hamel, a bulge in their lines that jutted into Allied territory. From these elevated positions, German troops could observe Allied movements, direct artillery fire with deadly accuracy, and threaten the vital city of Amiens, a crucial hub for Allied logistics and communications. German artillery, concealed in and around Le Hamel, was able to shell Allied trenches and rear areas almost at will. This constant bombardment not only inflicted casualties but also disrupted the flow of information and supplies, making it difficult for the Allies to coordinate their defences and plan counterattacks. The threat to Amiens was particularly grave. As a major railway junction and supply centre, Amiens was the linchpin connecting the British and French armies. If the Germans managed to capture or even seriously threaten Amiens, it would sever the vital link between the two Allied forces, potentially forcing a retreat and creating chaos along the front. By capturing Le Hamel, the Allies aimed to straighten their front lines, eliminating the dangerous German salient. This would not only reduce the threat to Amiens, but also simplify the defence of the sector, making it easier to move troops and supplies and to launch future offensives. Communication was the lifeblood of any army, and the battle for Le Hamel was as much about securing lines of communication as it was about territory. The village sat astride key routes used for relaying orders, moving reinforcements and coordinating artillery barrages. Its capture would ensure that messages and commands could flow swiftly and securely between units, reducing confusion and delay. Just as critical were the supply routes that snaked through the area. Ammunition, food, medical supplies and reinforcements all depended on these fragile lifelines. Securing Le Hamel would protect these routes from German interference, guaranteeing that the front lines remained well supplied and able to withstand enemy attacks. In the grander scheme of the war, the capture of Le Hamel was more than a tactical victory. It was a carefully chosen stepping stone, part of a larger Allied strategy to regain the initiative and break the deadlock that had gripped the Western Front for years. Success at Le Hamel would set the stage for even larger offensives, demonstrating that the Allies could coordinate complex operations and achieve decisive results. The battle also marked a turning point in military tactics. For the first time, the Allies employed a sophisticated, combined arms approach, meticulously coordinating infantry, artillery, tanks, and aircraft. This integration allowed for rapid advances, overwhelming firepower, and unprecedented flexibility on the battlefield. Tanks rumbled forward alongside infantry, while aircraft soared overhead, spotting targets and strafing enemy positions. Artillery laid down precise barrages, timed to the minute to protect advancing troops. This revolutionary approach not only broke the German defences at Le Hamel, but also paved the way for future Allied successes, signalling a new era in modern warfare and offering hope that the long stalemate of trench warfare could finally be overcome. General John Monash approached the planning of the Battle of Le Hamel with a level of detail and foresight that was virtually unprecedented in the First World War. He saw the battlefield not as a chaotic melee, but as a complex symphony, one in which every instrument, every note, and every pause had to be perfectly timed and precisely executed. Monash believed that victory was not simply a matter of courage or brute force, but of careful orchestration, where the smallest logistical detail could tip the balance between triumph and disaster. His blueprint for Le Hamel began with an unyielding focus on logistics. Monash meticulously mapped out supply routes, ensuring that every unit, no matter how far forward, would receive ammunition, rations and fuel at precisely the right moment. He understood that a hungry or undersupplied soldier was a liability, and that the rapid pace of the planned assault demanded supply lines that could move as quickly as the advancing troops. Every crate of ammunition, every ration tin, and every drop of fuel was accounted for, with reserves positioned to respond instantly to any unforeseen need. Central to Monash's plan was the coordination of artillery. He devised a sudden, precisely timed, creeping barrage, a wall of explosive fire that would move forward in perfect synchronization with the infantry and tanks. This barrage was not just a blunt instrument, it was a shield, designed to keep the enemy's heads down, destroy their defences and protect the advancing troops from machine gun fire. Artillery officers worked from detailed timetables, calculating the exact moment each gun would shift its aim, ensuring that the barrage never outpaced the men it was meant to protect. Monash also innovated with the use of smoke shells. 10% of all artillery rounds were designated as smoke, creating a moving curtain that would obscure the battlefield from German eyes. This smoke screen was carefully planned to drift with the wind, masking the movement of troops and tanks, blinding enemy gunners, and sowing confusion in the ranks. The result was a battlefield where the enemy could not see, could not aim, and could not respond effectively, maximizing the element of surprise and minimizing Allied casualties. 60 Mark V tanks were assigned highly specific roles within the plan. Some were tasked with breaching the dense belts of barbed wire that had stalled so many previous attacks. Others were directed to seek out and destroy German machine gun nests, neutralizing the deadliest threats to the infantry. Still more tanks were loaded with supplies, ammunition, food, water, and given the job of delivering these essentials directly to the front lines as the battle unfolded. This ensured that the momentum of the attack would never falter, and that the infantry would always have the support they needed to keep pushing forward. Aircraft, too, were woven into Monash's intricate design. They flew low over the battlefield, strafing enemy trenches and providing real-time spotting for the artillery. But Monash went further. He ordered the planes to fly at the same time as the tanks began their advance, using the roar of their engines to mask the distinctive clatter of tank tracks. This clever tactic preserved the element of surprise, preventing the Germans from realizing that a major armoured assault was underway until it was too late to respond. Every unit, from the largest battalion to the smallest squad, received clear, detailed objectives. Monash's staff prepared colour-coded maps and written orders, ensuring that every commander knew exactly what was expected and when. Communication lines, field telephones, runners and signallers were established in advance so that orders and updates could flow rapidly between headquarters and the front. This ensured that the entire force moved as one, adapting instantly to changing conditions and maintaining the relentless tempo of the assault. Monash's plan was a masterpiece of modern warfare, a multi-layered integrated assault that brought together logistics, firepower and technology in ways never before seen on the Western Front. Every element, from the supply trucks in the rear to the aircraft overhead, was synchronized to achieve maximum effect. The result was an overwhelming, lightning-fast attack that shattered enemy defenses, demonstrating the power of careful planning, innovation, and unity of purpose. Monash's blueprint for victory at La Hamel would become a model for future battles, forever changing the art of war. The Battle of La Hamel was not just another engagement on the Western Front. It was the crucible in which a revolutionary alliance was forged. For the first time, seasoned Australian troops, renowned for their tenacity and battlefield experience, joined forces with the newly arrived American soldiers whose enthusiasm and fresh perspective brought renewed energy to the Allied cause. This partnership was more than a simple coalition. It was a deliberate melding of different military traditions, tactical doctrines and national spirits, all orchestrated under the visionary leadership of Lieutenant General John Monash. The planning for La Hamel was meticulous, almost scientific in its precision. Monash, an engineer by training, believed that victory depended on careful preparation and the seamless integration of every available resource. Days before the attack, detailed rehearsals were conducted behind the lines. Australian and American units practiced side by side, learning to trust one another and to operate as a single, cohesive force. Every soldier knew his role, every officer understood the timing, and every unit was drilled in the choreography of the coming assault. At the heart of this new alliance was the unprecedented use of combined arms tactics. The British Mark I tanks, lumbering yet formidable, were to spearhead the advance, crushing barbed wire and silencing enemy machine gun nests. Behind them, a thunderous barrage from hundreds of Allied field guns would keep the German defenders pinned down, their heads low in the trenches. Overhead, the Royal Air Force would play a dual role, providing close air support to the advancing infantry and tanks, while also dropping smoke bombs and decoy flares to confuse and distract the enemy. This was warfare as a symphony, each element playing its part in perfect harmony. Yet the brilliance of the plan was matched only by the scale of the logistical challenge. The battlefield was a shattered landscape of mud, shell craters and tangled wire. Moving tanks and artillery into position required not just brute strength, but also ingenuity and coordination. Engineers worked through the night, laying down duckboards and bridging streams, while supply columns braved enemy fire to deliver ammunition, food and fuel to the front lines. Communication lines, telephone wires, signal flags and runners were established to ensure that every order, every change in the plan could be relayed instantly across the chaos of battle. Meanwhile, the German defenders clung to their tried and tested methods of defence. Their trenches were deep and well constructed, reinforced with concrete bunkers and bristling with machine guns. Barbed wire entanglements stretched for hundreds of meters, designed to slow and channel any attacking force into deadly kill zones. For years, these fortifications had proven nearly impregnable, repelling wave after wave of Allied assaults at a terrible cost. But at Hamel, the Allies were determined to break the stalemate. The new doctrine, combining tanks, artillery, infantry and aircraft in a single coordinated blow, threatened to render the old defences obsolete. The Germans, though resolute, faced an enemy that was no longer content to rely on sheer numbers and brute force. Instead, the Allies would use speed, surprise and overwhelming firepower to shatter the enemy line. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the stage was set for a confrontation unlike any the Western Front had seen before. On one side stood the entrenched traditions of static defence, on the other the bold promise of innovation and unity. The outcome of this clash would not only determine the fate of Hamel, but would also signal a new era in the art of modern warfare, one where alliances, technology and meticulous planning would shape the battles of the future. The first light of July 4th, 1918 had not yet touched the horizon. The battlefield at Hamel was enveloped in a heavy, almost suffocating darkness, broken only by the faint glimmer of dew on steel and the distant muffled sounds of men preparing for the coming storm. Every soldier, every crewman, every officer was poised in tense anticipation, knowing that within moments the world around them would erupt into chaos. At precisely 3:10 a.m. the silence was obliterated. Engines roared, gears clanked, and the ground itself seemed to tremble as the machinery of war surged to life. Overhead, British biplanes swept low across the battlefield, their engines a constant droning presence that masked the deeper, more ominous rumble of tanks advancing below. The aircraft flew in tight formation, their wings catching the first hints of dawn as they scouted enemy positions and relayed vital information to the ground forces. Beneath them, the Mark V tanks, monstrous armoured behemoths, lurched forward, their tracks chewing through mud and debris, their exhausts belching thick plumes into the cold morning air. Suddenly the entire front was illuminated by the synchronized flashes of over 600 artillery pieces. The ground shook violently as the guns unleashed a meticulously planned creeping barrage, each shell timed to land just ahead of the advancing infantry and tanks. The sky was torn apart by the arcs of thousands of shells, their explosions cascading along the horizon in a relentless rolling wave. The shock waves rippled through the earth, rattling bones and shattering nerves. Behind this wall of fire and smoke, the steel machines pressed forward. Mark V tanks, impervious to small arms fire, crushed tangled barbed wire beneath their massive tracks, flattening obstacles and pushing through barricades that had once seemed impenetrable. Artillery shells burst in dense clouds, sending shrapnel scything through enemy strongpoints and clearing the way for the relentless advance. The German defensive positions, meticulously prepared over months, were overwhelmed in minutes. Machine guns were abandoned, their barrels still warm from desperate last stands. Sandbags were shredded by shell fire, and gun emplacements lay shattered, their crews either killed or forced to flee. Trenches that had once bristled with resistance were now empty, littered with twisted metal and hastily discarded equipment. The tanks continued their inexorable advance, rolling over cratered ground and smashing through any remaining barricades. Their armour, slick with morning dew, glistened in the growing light as they carved new paths through the chaos. Barbed wire was torn and flattened, trenches collapsed under the weight of advancing steel, and nothing seemed capable of halting the mechanized tide. As the village of Le Hamel itself fell, green flares arced high above the ruins, cutting through the drifting smoke to signal the moment of capture. Signal lights flickered in the haze, and the first rays of sunrise illuminated a landscape transformed by violence. Shattered buildings, cratered streets, and the unmistakable signs of victory. In the dense woods beyond the village, the battle raged with even greater ferocity. Grenades detonated among the trees, their blasts sending splinters and debris flying in all directions. Bayonets flashed in the gloom as infantry cleared out the last pockets of resistance. Smoke curled through the undergrowth, and the relentless pounding of artillery left the forest floor littered with shattered branches and broken bodies. By 4:49 a.m. the woods had fallen eerily silent. The high ground, a vital objective that had dominated the battlefield, was now firmly in Allied hands. As the sun climbed higher, it cast long shadows across a landscape pockmarked by craters and shell holes, every inch of ground bearing the scars of the morning's violence. In just 93 minutes, the entire operation had unfolded with breathtaking speed and efficiency. The attack was a relentless mechanical onslaught, each phase executed with clockwork precision, leaving the enemy no time to regroup or counterattack. This was not a battle won by chance or brute force alone. Every element, infantry, tanks, artillery, and aircraft, moved in perfect harmony, guided by meticulous planning and flawless execution. The orchestration of destruction was as precise as it was devastating, a testament to the power of coordination and innovation. The Battle of Le Hamel shattered the stalemate of trench warfare with a symphony of steel, fire, and human ingenuity. It was an awe-inspiring display of mechanized warfare, one that would echo through the annals of military history as a turning point in the art of battle. The victory at Le Hamel was not won by chance, but by a combination of meticulous planning, innovative tactics, and the unyielding courage of those who faced the relentless pressure of hostile conditions. Every detail was considered by Allied commanders, from the placement of sandbags and barbed wire to the arrangement of communication lines and the careful study of battlefield maps. In the days leading up to the assault, officers and engineers worked tirelessly, transforming the landscape into a network of defences and staging areas, all while under the constant threat of enemy observation and artillery fire. As the attack commenced, the men of the Allied forces advanced into a maelstrom of machine gun fire. The air was thick with the crack of bullets and the thunder of exploding shells. In these moments, revolvers and grenades became more than just weapons. They were lifelines, essential for overcoming the heavily fortified German positions. Soldiers hurled grenades into enemy nests, using the cover of smoke and chaos to close the distance, while revolvers provided crucial close-quarters firepower in the tangled trenches and shell holes. The brutal reality of trench warfare demanded that every man be ready to fight hand-to-hand. Bayonets were fixed to rifles, glinting in the dim morning light as soldiers prepared to clear enemy trenches. Grenades exploded in rapid succession, sending shockwaves through the labyrinth of earthworks and forcing the collapse of enemy resistance. The smoke that billowed from recently cleared fortifications marked the path of the advancing troops, each step forward a testament to their determination and training. These actions, repeated countless times across the battlefield, tested the very limits of both men and their equipment. Helmets and rifles bore the scars of close combat, while battered fortifications stood as silent witnesses to the ferocity of the fighting. Medals would later be awarded for acts of bravery, but in the moment, survival depended on the ability of equipment and fortifications to withstand the onslaught. The battle at Le Hamel was also a proving ground for equipment, both new and old. Inexperienced gear was pressed into service alongside tried-and-tested weapons, each piece subjected to the harshest conditions imaginable. Mud, rain, and the constant threat of enemy fire pushed every item to its breaking point. Helmets and uniforms became caked with dirt, rifles were stacked together after each advance, and every soldier learned to trust in the reliability of his tools. The struggle was not just between men, but between the ingenuity of fortifications and the destructive power of modern weaponry. Machine gun nests, once thought impregnable, were overrun by determined troops. Trenches filled with smoke and debris as the battle raged, and the ground was soon littered with spent ammunition, broken wire, and the remnants of shattered defences. Each advance was hard won, every position contested with ferocious resistance. When the guns finally fell silent, the battlefield was transformed. Mud-caked rifles and helmets lay scattered among battered fortifications, the silence broken only by the distant sounds of recovery and regrouping. The outcome of the battle was not simply a triumph of technology or tactics, it was a testament to the resilience of equipment, the strength of fortifications, and the unbreakable spirit of those who endured the storm. In the end, ordinary tools and defences met extraordinary challenges. The careful preparation of sandbags, the strategic placement of rifles and gear, and the constant reinforcement of defensive positions all played a crucial role in the victory at Le Hamel. This battle proved that with the right combination of planning, equipment, and sheer determination, even the most daunting obstacles could be overcome on the fields of war. In the early hours of July 4, 1918, the operation at Le Hamel commenced with a meticulously coordinated artillery barrage. For several minutes the thunder of hundreds of guns filled the air, their shells landing with deadly precision on German positions. This was not a random bombardment. Each battery was assigned specific targets, and the timing was calculated to the second. The barrage not only devastated enemy trenches but also severed communication lines and cut through the dense belts of barbed wire that had long protected the German front. As the final shells exploded and the barrage lifted, a new phase of the assault began. Mark V tanks, the latest in armoured warfare, rumbled forward across the shattered landscape. Their thick armour allowed them to shrug off small arms fire, and their caterpillar tracks enabled them to cross shell holes and tangled wire with ease. These tanks led the way, crushing obstacles and creating paths for the infantry that followed close behind. Behind this armoured spearhead, waves of Allied infantry, Australians, Americans, and British, advanced in carefully organised lines. Unlike the chaotic charges of earlier battles, these troops moved with discipline and coordination, each unit assigned a specific objective. They quickly occupied the devastated German trenches, overcoming pockets of resistance with grenades and bayonets, and securing the ground as they advanced. The German salient at Le Hamel, a bulge in the front line that had threatened Allied positions for months, was eliminated in less than 93 minutes. Each phase of the attack unfolded almost exactly on schedule, a testament to the detailed planning and rehearsals that had preceded the operation. Remarkably, Allied casualties were exceptionally low for such a rapid and complex assault. The combination of surprise, overwhelming firepower, and innovative tactics such as the use of tanks and creeping barrages meant that the attackers suffered far fewer losses than in previous offensives. Medical stations, already prepared behind the lines, were able to treat the wounded quickly, and supply lines remained intact throughout the battle. In contrast, German forces suffered devastating losses. Many defenders were killed or captured in their shattered trenches, and large quantities of equipment, including artillery pieces, machine guns, and ammunition, fell into Allied hands. The loss of these resources further weakened the German position on the Western Front. The Mark V tanks, which had been the spearhead of the assault, proved their worth beyond doubt. Out of all the tanks deployed, only 3 failed to reach their assigned objectives, most becoming immobilized by the treacherous terrain rather than enemy action. The majority reached their goals and provided crucial support in consolidating the captured ground. Logistics, often the Achilles heel of large offensives, were handled with unprecedented efficiency. Specially designed supply tanks delivered over 12,000 pounds of ammunition, food, and medical supplies directly to the front lines. This not only ensured that the advancing troops were well provisioned, but also minimized their exposure to enemy fire during resupply. For the first time in history, aircraft played a vital role in battlefield resupply. Biplanes swooped low over the front, dropping supply packages by parachute into designated zones. This innovative method allowed for rapid delivery of essential materials, even to units that had advanced far beyond the original lines, and hinted at the future of aerial logistics in warfare. The Germans, desperate to regain lost ground, launched a counterattack later that day. However, the Allies were ready. Concentrated machine gun and artillery fire broke up the assault before it could gain momentum, leaving the newly captured positions firmly in Allied hands. Though the Battle of Le Hamel was small in scale compared to other engagements on the Western Front, its outcome was transformative. The Allies had captured all their objectives, inflicted heavy losses on the enemy, and demonstrated the effectiveness of combined arms tactics. The success at Le Hamel set the stage for the larger offensives that would follow, signaling a turning point in the war. The era of costly, futile assaults against entrenched positions was drawing to a close. The lessons learned at Le Hamel about planning, coordination, and the integration of new technology would shape the final months of World War I and change the face of warfare forever. The Battle of Le Hamel was more than a tactical victory. It was a seismic shift in the very fabric of military thinking. Before this moment, wars were often decided by the sheer weight of numbers, the relentless push of infantry and the grinding attrition of artillery barrages. But at Le Hamel, a new vision emerged. Here, for the first time, commanders recognized that victory could be engineered through the careful orchestration of technology, intelligence, and human ingenuity. The battle became a living laboratory where the old ways of war collided with the possibilities of the future. At Le Hamel, the seamless synchronization of infantry, artillery, tanks, and aircraft was not just a theoretical concept, it was put into practice with stunning precision. For the first time, tanks rolled forward in perfect harmony with advancing infantry, while artillery laid down a protective curtain of fire, and aircraft soared overhead, relaying vital information and disrupting enemy positions. This was the birth of combined arms tactics, a revolutionary approach that transformed the battlefield into a dynamic, interconnected system. Communication became the lifeblood of the operation, with signals and orders flowing rapidly between units, ensuring that every element moved as one. This level of coordination was unprecedented, and it set a new standard for military operations around the world. The technological innovations unveiled at Le Hamel sparked a chain reaction that would echo through the decades. The creeping barrage, a moving wall of artillery fire, shielded advancing troops and shattered enemy defenses. Tanks, once unreliable and misunderstood, proved their worth as armored spearheads capable of crossing trenches and crushing barbed wire. Aircraft, still in their infancy, demonstrated the power of aerial reconnaissance and close air support. These breakthroughs laid the groundwork for the rapid evolution of military technology, from the lumbering tanks and fragile biplanes of World War I to the agile armored vehicles, precision-guided munitions and unmanned drones of today. Intelligence gathering, once limited to scouts and spies, became a science with information flowing from the skies to the front lines in real time. Strategically, Hamel shattered the old doctrine of static trench warfare. The battle's success proved that meticulous planning, innovation and flexibility could break even the most formidable defenses. Detailed briefings ensured that every soldier understood their role, while synchronized attacks maximized the impact of each unit. The integration of new technologies, tanks, aircraft and advanced artillery, created a force multiplier that overwhelmed the enemy. This doctrine became the blueprint for future offensives, from the sweeping advances at Amiens to the lightning-fast blitzkrieg tactics of World War II. The lessons of Hamel rippled outward, influencing military thinkers and commanders across the globe. The implications for military doctrine were profound and far-reaching. Armies around the world studied the methods pioneered at Hamel, adapting and refining them to suit their own needs. The mechanized warfare of World War II, with its tanks, aircraft and rapid maneuvers, was a direct descendant of the innovations born on that July morning. In the decades that followed, the focus shifted to speed, precision, and the seamless integration of emerging technologies. Radar, electronic warfare, and eventually cyber operations became essential tools of the modern commander. Today, network-centric warfare, where information flows instantly between sensors, shooters, and decision-makers, traces its lineage back to the lessons of Hamel. As we look to the future, the legacy of Hamel is unmistakable. Modern battlefields are shaped by the relentless pursuit of innovation. Drones and autonomous vehicles patrol the skies and the ground, guided by satellite networks and artificial intelligence. Data-driven decision-making allows commanders to anticipate threats and seize opportunities in real time. The ability to adapt, to harness new technologies, and to outthink the enemy has become the defining feature of military success. The spirit of Hamel, its emphasis on intellect, creativity, and the integration of diverse capabilities, remains at the heart of modern warfare. In the end, the Battle of Hamel stands as a powerful reminder that the fate of wars and the future of warfare itself rests not just on the battlefield, but in the minds of those who dare to innovate. It is a testament to the enduring power of strategy, technology, and human ingenuity to shape the course of history. Artillery was not merely a supporting arm at the Battle of Hamel. It was the thunderous backbone upon which the entire operation rested. Its evolution, deployment, and the unprecedented precision with which it was coordinated would ultimately shape the outcome of the conflict, marking a turning point in the use of firepower on the Western Front. By 1918, the face of artillery had changed dramatically. Gone were the days of static, indiscriminate barrages that had characterized the early years of trench warfare. Instead, the guns at Hamel represented the cutting edge of military technology, sleeker, more mobile, and, most importantly, far more accurate. These artillery pieces were not just more powerful, they were smarter. Crews were now equipped with advanced rangefinders and targeting mechanisms, allowing them to calculate trajectories with remarkable precision. Officers meticulously planned each strike, poring over maps and intelligence reports to ensure every shell landed exactly where it was needed. The British and Australian forces assembled a formidable arsenal for the battle. Field guns, howitzers, and heavy artillery pieces were each selected and positioned with painstaking care. Every weapon had a specific role, some to break wire, others to destroy enemy strongpoints, and still others to lay down suppressive fire as the infantry advanced. Among the most significant innovations was the creeping barrage, a moving curtain of shells that advanced in precise increments across no man's land. This tactic required perfect synchronization between the gunners and the infantry, who would follow just behind the wall of explosions. shielded from enemy fire and able to close the distance before defenders could recover. For the first time in the war, artillery units worked in close concert with infantry, tanks, and even aircraft. Communication was key. Forward observers relayed real-time information, allowing gunners to adjust their fire as the battle unfolded. Tanks and biplanes coordinated their movements with the barrages, creating a seamless, integrated assault that overwhelmed German defences. Behind the scenes, logistics played a critical, if often overlooked, role. The sheer volume of ammunition required for such a meticulously planned operation was staggering. Convoys of trucks and teams of labourers worked tirelessly to keep the guns supplied, moving thousands of shells from depots to the front lines under the constant threat of enemy fire. These shells were carefully stockpiled behind the lines, each crate marked and accounted for. The relentless demand for firepower meant that every shell had to be in the right place at the right time, ready to be loaded and fired at a moment's notice. Communication lines were the nervous system of the artillery effort. Signallers braved shellfire to lay telephone wires across the battlefield, ensuring that messages from forward observers could reach the gun crews instantly. This allowed for rapid adjustments in targeting, making the artillery far more responsive to the shifting tides of battle. The result was devastating. Artillery could now respond in real time to enemy movements, laying down a torrent of fire that shattered trenches, obliterated strong points, and left the battlefield a smoking ruin. German positions were systematically targeted and neutralized. Machine gun nests that had once dominated no man's land were silenced, and vital supply routes were cut off, isolating defenders and preventing reinforcements from reaching the front. The initial bombardment, timed to the minute, shattered enemy defences at dawn. As the infantry surged forward, precision fire continued to support them at every stage, breaking up counterattacks and clearing the way through the devastated landscape. The arsenal included more than just high-explosive shells. Smoke shells were used to conceal troop movements, creating a shifting veil that confused enemy gunners. New fuses allowed shells to burst in the air above trenches, showering defenders with deadly shrapnel and maximizing their lethal effect. Timing and coordination were everything. Officers synchronized their watches to the second, ensuring that every phase of the attack unfolded with clockwork precision. Artillery was no longer a blunt instrument. It had become a finely tuned weapon, capable of shaping the battlefield with surgical accuracy. The success of artillery at Le Hamel was a testament to the power of technology, logistics, and teamwork. Technical crews worked alongside logisticians and commanders, integrating new innovations and ensuring that every element of the operation functioned as a unified whole. The lessons learned at Le Hamel would echo through military doctrine for decades to come. The battle demonstrated that with careful planning, technological innovation, and seamless integration, artillery could be transformed from a weapon of attrition into a decisive force, one that would shape the very nature of modern warfare. Tanks, once dismissed as little more than lumbering curiosities, emerged at Le Hamel as the vanguard of a new era in warfare. Their journey from experimental prototypes to battlefield game-changers was marked by relentless innovation, hard-won lessons, and the vision of commanders who saw their potential to break the deadlock of trench warfare. By July 1918, armoured vehicles had evolved dramatically. Early tanks were plagued by mechanical failures, slow speeds, and limited firepower. But through persistent engineering and battlefield experience, they became reliable, coordinated assets. Their presence on the battlefield fundamentally reshaped military tactics, forcing both sides to rethink how wars would be fought. The British Mark V tank stood at the forefront of this transformation. With its thick, riveted armour and a powerful six-cylinder Ricardo engine, the Mark V could traverse the most punishing terrain. Its design improvements over earlier models included better steering, increased speed, and enhanced crew comfort, making it a formidable force on the battlefield. These tanks were engineered to overcome the very obstacles that had defined the Western Front. Capable of crossing wide trenches, crushing dense tangles of barbed wire and shrugging off small arms fire, they brought unprecedented mobility and protection to the front lines. No longer would soldiers be trapped in static positions, vulnerable to machine guns and artillery barrages. At Le Hamel, tanks were no longer sent into battle alone, as isolated targets. Instead, they became the centerpiece of a carefully orchestrated combined arms assault working in close partnership with infantry and artillery. The attack was meticulously planned. Tanks advanced in synchronized waves alongside infantry, their movements timed to the minute. Artillery barrages laid down creeping barrages just ahead, suppressing enemy positions and clearing the way for the armoured vehicles and their supporting troops. The Mark V's main armament, 6-pounder guns mounted in sponsons and multiple machine guns, provided direct fire support. As they rumbled forward, tanks targeted enemy machine gun nests, pillboxes and fortified strongpoints, neutralizing threats that had previously stalled infantry advances and caused heavy casualties. Mechanical reliability, once the Achilles heel of early tanks, had improved significantly by 1918. Maintenance crews worked tirelessly to keep the machines running, often under fire. Still, breakdowns and mechanical failures were not uncommon, and crews had to be resourceful, making field repairs in the midst of battle. The terrain itself posed constant challenges. Tanks slogged through mud, navigated shell craters and clambered over debris-strewn landscapes. Drivers and commanders had to make split-second decisions to avoid becoming bogged down or immobilized, knowing that a stranded tank could become a death trap for its crew. Communication was another critical innovation. To coordinate their movements with infantry and artillery, tank crews used signal flags, lamps, and even carrier pigeons. These methods, though primitive by modern standards, were vital for maintaining cohesion and ensuring that the assault advanced as a unified force. Tactically, tanks spearheaded the assault, drawing enemy fire away from the advancing infantry. Their armoured hulls absorbed bullets and shrapnel that would have decimated unprotected soldiers, allowing the infantry to follow in their wake and exploit breaches in the enemy line. The psychological impact of tanks was profound. Their sheer size, noise, and unstoppable advance shattered German morale. Defenders, unprepared for the sight and sound of these armoured behemoths, often abandoned their positions in panic, leaving behind weapons and supplies as they fled. Behind the thick steel hulls, engines roared and treads churned relentlessly forward. The mechanical symphony of gears, pistons, and tracks was the soundtrack of a new kind of warfare, one that combined firepower, protection, and mobility in a single unstoppable package. The performance of tanks at Le Hamel was nothing short of revolutionary. Their success proved that armoured vehicles could not only survive on the modern battlefield but could also lead the way to victory. Tanks bridged the gap between firepower and mobility, enabling rapid, decisive gains that would have been impossible just months earlier. Their ability to cross trenches and keep pace with advancing infantry transformed the tempo of battle. The innovations in tank design and tactics at Le Hamel foreshadowed the armoured advances of future conflicts. The lessons learned here would shape the development of armoured warfare for decades, cementing tanks as enduring icons of 20th century battlefields and forever altering the face of war. While the thunder of tanks and the relentless barrage of artillery dominated the front lines, a quieter but equally crucial revolution was taking place just behind the chaos, one that would forever change the nature of warfare. This was the evolution of communications and intelligence, a transformation that unfolded in the shadows but proved vital to victory at Le Hamel. At Le Hamel, the ability to transmit orders and gather information with unprecedented speed became as essential as the firepower unleashed on the enemy. The battle was not just won by bullets and shells, but by the invisible threads of information that connected every soldier, every gun, and every decision. Field telephones, strung together by miles of cable painstakingly laid through mud and shell craters, formed the backbone of command and control. These lines allowed headquarters to reach out instantly to the front, relaying orders, requesting support, and coordinating the complex choreography of infantry, tanks, and artillery. The men who laid these lines, communication operators, worked tirelessly, often crawling through no man's land under enemy fire, spools of cable slung over their shoulders. Their bravery ensured that even in the midst of chaos, headquarters could direct artillery barrages with pinpoint accuracy and adjust infantry movements on the fly. Yet these lifelines were fragile. A single enemy shell could sever a cable, plunging entire units into isolation. The vulnerability of wired communications meant that backup systems were not just helpful, they were absolutely essential. Signal lamps flashed coded messages across the smoky expanse, while coloured flags and semaphore provided visual cues that could cut through the din of battle. These methods, though simple, were reliable when technology failed. For messages that demanded absolute certainty, runners, brave men carrying handwritten notes, dashed through trenches and sprinted across open ground, risking their lives to ensure that vital information reached its destination. In moments of greatest urgency, carrier pigeons were released, their small forms darting above the battlefield, carrying messages in tiny canisters strapped to their legs. These birds often succeeded where men and machines could not, delivering critical updates that could mean the difference between confusion and coordinated action. Meanwhile, a new technology was making its debut: wireless radio. Though still in its infancy and plagued by technical limitations, early radio sets began to appear at command posts, offering a tantalizing glimpse of the future. Operators tapped out coded messages in Morse, their signals crackling through the ether. Each successful transmission was a small miracle, allowing for rapid communication over distances that would have been impossible just years before. To protect these vital messages, code books and cipher wheels were used to encrypt information. Only those with the correct keys could unlock the meaning, safeguarding plans from enemy interception. On the other side of the wire, listening posts, manned by soldiers with headphones and notepads, strained to intercept enemy transmissions. They listened for patterns, deciphered codes, and searched for any hint of weakness in the enemy's plans. Behind the front lines, intelligence officers worked tirelessly, piecing together intercepted signals, scrutinizing aerial reconnaissance photographs, and interrogating prisoners. Each fragment of information was a clue, a piece of a vast and deadly puzzle. The integration of these diverse sources, signals, photographs, reports, created a clearer, more dynamic picture of enemy positions and intentions than ever before. Maps were updated in real time, and decisions could be made with a level of confidence previously unimaginable. Commanders, armed with this flood of information, could adapt their plans on the fly, responding to new threats and opportunities as they emerged. The fog of war began to lift, replaced by a new clarity born of communication and intelligence. At Hamel, the fusion of cutting-edge communication technology and sophisticated intelligence gathering marked a true turning point. It was here that the modern command network was born, where information became as powerful a weapon as any gun or tank. The battle transformed the fog of war into a battlefield where information could be weaponized, where the right message, delivered at the right moment, could change the course of history. The innovations at Hamel set the stage for the sophisticated command networks of modern warfare, where the flow of information is as decisive as the might of armies. The lessons learned here would echo through every conflict that followed, shaping the very nature of war itself. Behind the thunder of guns and the rumble of tanks, a different kind of battle unfolded, one that was fought not with bullets or bayonets, but with crates, wagons, and timetables. The battle of supply chains and logistics was as relentless and unforgiving as any clash on the front lines. Every shell fired, every tank that advanced, and every soldier who held the line depended on a vast, intricate network working tirelessly behind the scenes. Miles from the chaos of battle, sprawling supply depots became the lifeblood of the operation. These depots, often hidden from enemy observation, were meticulously organized, with mountains of ammunition, crates of rations, and barrels of fuel stacked in precise order. Every item was accounted for, every shipment tracked, as quartermasters and logisticians worked around the clock to anticipate the army's needs. Ammunition, food, fuel, and spare parts flowed through a complex web of transport routes that stretched from the rear echelons to the very edge of the battlefield. Each link in this chain was vital. If one failed, the entire operation could grind to a halt. Convoys of trucks and horse-drawn wagons wound their way through the countryside, braving not only the threat of enemy fire, but also the ever-present dangers of mud, rain, and impassable roads. Trains loaded with everything from artillery shells to medical supplies arrived at forward railheads, critical junctions where the rail network met the front. Here, teams of soldiers worked with practiced efficiency, unloading cargo and transferring it to waiting trucks and wagons. Every minute counted, as delays could mean shortages at the front or missed opportunities in battle. These convoys then set out across treacherous terrain, muddy roads churned by rain and shell fire, bridges hastily repaired and tracks cratered by explosions. Drivers and teamsters navigated these hazards with determination, knowing that the fate of the men at the front depended on their success. Supplies had to reach the trenches on time, no matter the obstacles. At the front, camouflaged storage depots and redistribution hubs sprang up, blending into the landscape to avoid enemy detection. Here, supplies were sorted, inventoried, and dispatched to the units that needed them most. Soldiers worked in shifts, often under the threat of enemy artillery, ensuring that every battalion received its share of food, ammunition, and equipment. Maintenance workshops, often little more than tents or makeshift shelters, operated day and night. Mechanics and engineers toiled over damaged vehicles and weapons, salvaging what they could and sending repaired equipment back into action. Their work was vital. Without it, tanks and trucks would be left idle and artillery would fall silent. Specialized vehicles, including water trucks and mobile field kitchens, played a crucial role in sustaining the fighting force. Water was delivered to the front lines under fire, and hot meals were prepared in the field, providing soldiers with a rare comfort amid the hardships of war. These efforts kept morale high and bodies strong, allowing the men to endure the rigors of combat. Throughout the operation, the seamless coordination of transport, storage, and maintenance formed an invisible backbone, one that transformed careful planning into battlefield performance. It was this relentless behind-the-scenes effort, powered by teamwork and ingenuity, that made the rapid and decisive victory at Le Hamel possible. Without the tireless work of the logisticians, mechanics, drivers, and cooks, the battle could not have been won. As the thunder of artillery and the rattle of machine guns faded into memory, the battlefield of Le Hamel entered a new and equally crucial phase, one defined not by the clash of armies but by the relentless work of transformation and recovery. The silence that followed the chaos was filled with the purposeful movements of men determined to reshape the land that had just witnessed such violence. The battered landscape, once a deadly maze of shell holes, shattered trees, and tangled wire, became a vast canvas for military engineers. Their mission was clear: to restore order to devastation and to prepare the ground for whatever came next. Teams of engineers moved with remarkable speed and discipline. Craters, some large enough to swallow a truck, were filled with earth and debris, while roads torn apart by shell fire and tank tracks were painstakingly rebuilt. Every shovelful of dirt and every plank of wood laid was a step toward restoring the vital arteries of movement across the scarred terrain. Where streams and ditches had been blasted into impassable obstacles, temporary bridges rose. These steel structures, assembled with precision and speed, allowed men, horses, and the new machines of war to cross where only hours before there had been chaos and destruction. The ability to move supplies and reinforcements quickly was now as important as any weapon. Recovery teams, often working under the threat of renewed enemy fire, ventured out onto the battlefield to salvage what they could. Damaged tanks, their armour scarred and tracks broken, were towed back for repair. Artillery pieces, some half buried in mud, were carefully extracted and readied for action once more. Nothing of value was left behind. At the heart of this recovery effort were the mobile workshops, marvels of wartime ingenuity. Outfitted with the latest tools and staffed by skilled mechanics, these workshops brought the repair shop to the front lines. Tanks and trucks that might otherwise have been lost for weeks were restored to working order in a matter of hours, keeping the momentum of the advance alive. The trenches and dugouts, once the scene of desperate fighting, were not abandoned. Instead, they were reinforced with timber and sandbags, or repurposed as command posts, medical stations, or supply depots. The very earthworks that had sheltered men from enemy fire were adapted to serve the evolving needs of the campaign, a testament to the resourcefulness of those who fought here. The ground itself became a laboratory for innovation. New techniques and equipment were tested in real time. Portable pumps to clear flooded trenches, reinforced duckboards to keep men above the mud, and experimental materials to strengthen fortifications. Every improvement, no matter how small, could mean the difference between success and failure in the battles to come. Defensive measures were not neglected. Anti-tank obstacles were repositioned to block likely avenues of enemy attack, while barbed wire was relaid in intricate patterns to slow any advance. Communication lines, lifelines for command and control, were rerouted and buried deeper to protect them from shell fire, ensuring that orders could flow even in the midst of renewed fighting. Each act of engineering, though often unseen and unheralded, played a vital role in shaping the post-battle landscape. The work of these men laid the groundwork for future operations, turning the devastation of war into a foundation for progress. In the aftermath of Le Hamel, the battlefield itself became a testament to human resilience and ingenuity, a place where destruction was met with determination and where the seeds of victory were sown not just in combat but in the tireless labour that followed.